Hello everyone, my name is Paul Third and here we are again for another episode of the Working Audio Tools podcast. I was ready to say with Ed Thorne, but Ed isn't with me this week because he's in Costa Rica. This is just what happens when people are single and they have money and just go on holiday whatever they want, and I've got to hoard the ship still. So thankfully I have a very good guest for you this week. Now, for anybody that's into 500 series gear and is into analogue, this is going to be probably a very interesting episode because I've got a lot of questions. But I'm going to try and not get too much into the weeds because I know all of you know what I'm like. I can waffle. Okay, with that chit-chat out the way, let me introduce you to Peterson Goodwyn. Now, Peterson, many people may not know who you are. Some might know who you are. So for anybody that does know who you are, if you can give us just a quick little intro and a little bit of a bio on you.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for having me, Paul. Happy to be here, filling in while people are on vacation. You know, it's understandable.
They're not big shoes to fill, don't worry.
So, yeah, my name is Peterson Goodwyn. I run a company called DIY Recording Equipment. We make DIY kits for people to build their own analog audio gear. We have microphones, compressors, mic preamps, stuff like that. Most people get into what we do through our beginner kits, which are like DI boxes, reamp boxes, kind of stuff that everyone needs around the studio, and you can save a little money and learn some stuff about the gear you use by building it. And I'm a recording engineer, musician, producer myself. I started this company 15 years ago when I was working as a freelance audio engineer here in Philadelphia. And, you know, I think like you, like a lot of your viewers, I was trying to put together a rig that I could be, you know, nothing spectacular and nothing big, but just a couple channels that I could be really proud of and go out and get clients and say, hey, I can make you sound amazing. And man, just coming from musician world to recording world, the sticker shock was crazy. It was like, okay, I mean, I could put together a drum set and a guitar rig and stuff, but a recording rig is a different thing. And at that time, there weren't really companies like mine. There were actually one or two, but there are now several. But there was this great forum where people were called Group DIY, where people were building stuff, and that just blew my mind. It was like, oh, you can build your own stuff. And then I found out, oh, the parts that you use to build this $3,000 gear do not add up to $3,000. So that was the big light bulb moment for me. And so I built a couple things for my recording rig. In fact, I built an 8-channel mic preamp that became my like portable rig for a few years. And then, figured, you know, I should turn other people onto this and started making them myself.
Which I think is a really, 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 really important thing to have in the industry because you don't need to worry about the political side of it. You know, I just deal with all that side. So I can say the things that the internet wants to say that you don't have to say. So in my personal opinion, again, opinions divided, I think that there are a lot of things out there, especially analog gear, especially lots of things in the audio world that are extremely expensive. And sometimes you could get to a point where you think, why is this so expensive? Now, what I love about people like yourself is that not only are you allowing people to build the gear, so from building the gear you can see the components and obviously you don't need to get too much in the weeds, but it gives you a good idea of the way things are built, how things go together, and obviously in regards to price, you could get, you know, very good gear for, you know, a much better price. So in regards to the quality aspect of it, do you feel that there are any actual differences in doing it DIY compared to, for example, you've got a 1073 clone. So what would be the main differences for you? Right there. Mm-hmm. So if we think about your 1073, and obviously there is a price difference. Obviously you have, I watched the whole video you did. I'll leave a link in the description when you went through the 1073. It was fascinating. And is there actually any difference when you do it DIY? If you get the right transformers and you kind of work to the schematics and you do it kind of as close as possible, is there really that much of a difference audibly to you?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, you said you didn't want to go into the weeds, and I didn't believe you. And now I really don't believe you.
I can't help it. I can't help it.
So how different is a great question. I think there's a simple answer where I can assume what you mean, and the answer is like not really different at all. You can build world-class recording gear. I have clients, Gimel Keaton, Young Guru, the most celebrated hip hop producer of all, engineer of all time. Jay-Z's engineer, built these, uses them. This is not in any way different from the world-class stuff that you would buy for 2 or 3 times the price. That's the simple answer, and I think what most people are wondering when they're asking what you asked. The part that's exciting to me to talk about, but we could spend 5 hours talking about, is what are the differences, and different from what? Different from the vintage one, or different from the modern clones, or how are all the clones different, and that kind of thing. And let me just expound a bit on the first answer, because I think anyone can say that, so let me just back it up a little bit. A lot of it comes down to economics, and parts in general are not a huge cost, not a huge portion of the cost of something you buy. If you bought, so this is ours, it's $400 for the DIY kit. And when we sell it as a DIY kit, parts are like 50% of that cost. And the rest is like our labor, our design time, shipping it, supporting it, that kind of thing. When you buy the same thing for $1,000 or $1,200 from Sweetwater, it's the same parts cost. Yeah. It's just they have a lot of other different costs. Sweetwater needs a markup. Maybe there's a distributor between the company and Sweetwater that needs a markup. They have assembly. They have a much higher return rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe they just have a higher margin. So parts are not usually a huge part of the final price tag, but they are most of what makes up the quality of a product and the sound quality. So with DIY, it really is, few things in the world are actually a hack the way they promise to be. It's usually kind of you get what you pay for. But with DIY, there really is that hack that's like, if you're getting the same parts, you're going to get the same quality. The part that you're adding in yourself is the assembly, of course, and that's why you're saving so much money.
So what I find fascinating is that this is going to be something that for many viewers they've not even thought of, but me being in retail back in the day, is when you mention margins and markup and stuff like that, it's something that many people forget, is that when they see, for example, a Neve or an SSL or an API, you have 1, the cost, then 2, the distribution costs, and as you said, a distributor will then need to take a markup on that, and then you've just got the brand. You've just got sometimes a figure that certain manufacturers can just charge for stuff. But what I've always found fascinating with all this stuff is that I think many people glorify very, very simple parts. As you said, the parts you can get relatively affordably, but you can have your 1073 and you could get out of a Neve console, you could say, get the SimCity desk and get a Neve module, and somebody would say, well, that's better, and that's worth the price. When actually, when you think about it, the components are the components. And really, I think what many people put too much emphasis on is kind of rarity and history. But when in actual, audio terms, there isn't actually any reason for something to be better just because it came out a certain console or because certain music was made by it. At the end of the day, it is relatively simple. So do you think that sometimes or actually, do you just think the industry has kind of went nuts over the past 10, 20 years where everybody is just so consumed about vintage gear for just no reason? I just always thought it'd be good to speak to designers like yourself to kind of ask the question, do we glorify gear too much in like the modern day?
So I heard one thing in there which I want to follow up on about parts. So I'll just pin that for later, because I think that where you arrived is a really interesting question. And yes, absolutely. It's understandable. It's really nobody's fault except the phenomenon of marketing.
Yeah.
But looking back when I was getting into recording, which is, to me, doesn't feel like that long ago, 15, 16 years ago, the prosumer market was really just starting to kind of be developed. And at that time, there were only a couple microphones under $1,000 that were any good.
I remember those days. Yep.
And that kind of thing. And so I think that gear was treated much more like a tool by professionals. And of course, a lot of those professionals had very passionate opinions about what gear they loved and didn't love and that kind of thing. Yeah, you had this whole market of people like me at the time, like musicians trying to put together a home studio, wanting to sound good, and you're comparing yourself to these giants. And so the marketing angle, if you're trying to sell this outboard gear, which is also kind of a new phenomenon at that time, is easy. It's like, oh, well, these people are insecure about how good their recordings sound. We can promise them that the difference between where they're at and where these greats are at is the gear. And so I think a lot of that has really taken hold. And because the process of getting from my mixes suck to Nevermind or whatever, or Abbey Road, is so mysterious and long, and that it's easy to put this thing in between there and say it's the gear. And so I think the gear does take on this almost celebrity kind of like
it does
deity status, which is totally bullshit and totally unnecessary and totally unproductive to inspiration and improving your craft and stuff. I do think if you strip all that away, that the vintage gear is fantastic and interesting, and there's a lot of good reasons why it's still used. I don't need that mythology. I don't really deal in it. I don't care about it. I think that we should think much more of our gear as tools and think
Correct.
More about what inspires me, what do I need in my workflow and that kind of thing. And then if the conversation turns to, well, I need something that sounds like this, very often the answer might be, oh, well, then that's kind of a Neve preamp. That's what you want. That's the kind of like conversation I like to deal in, not like, okay, I suck and I need to be great. I need $20,000 to spend on vintage gear,
And how hard is that from, a circuit design point of view to keep things very consistent? Because that's something that, but especially if you think about the 1073 EQs, the vintage ones. Again, if you think about even the UAD plugins and stuff like that, if you stick them in Plugin Doctor, you'll notice that even without adding gain, just changing the frequency pot can actually alter the response. And it's obviously there must be tolerances in there. So when you're making your own kind of equipment, how hard is it to manage to keep that consistency per unit? Especially as 500 series easier, or is there any difference to having, like a 2U or a 3U? How hard is it to keep that consistency? You
mean to be consistent with, to make a modern clone that's consistent with the vintage unit?
That and say unit to unit, kind of unit to unit consistency.
Right. Well, that's interesting because part of the struggle of recreating vintage gear now is that modern components are too good. So
yeah, correct.
They're very consistent. Or in engineering terms, the tolerances between them are much lower. So now, all of these that ship out sound the same, basically.
Yeah.
That wasn't even true between channels on an 80 series Neve console that these are based off of. And so that's kind of where the art and sweat work of the kind of cloning comes in. Is like, how do we use what's available to us with modern components and get it to sound and behave as closely as possible to the vintage stuff where, and just to give you an example, Neve used different transformer suppliers in the same console, for the different channels. And so people understandably obsess over, the St. Ives is correct, or no, the Mariner transformer is correct.
Or the Cardinal, yeah.
Neve didn't even care enough to to wait until they were done with one console to put them in the next one. You know, it was like whatever worked. And so there's a really interesting irony where we're all trying to get the closest to the original, you know, with these clones. And we go to all these lengths to recreate it perfectly. But then what is the original? There is no, you know, gold bar sitting in a temperature controlled thing. So you just kind of need to immerse yourself in it, listen to a lot of them, you know, and do the best you can.
How much of it is measurements? Because many people say you got to use your ears, and ears are very important. But I take it from, you know, when you're trying to make all of this stuff and to get into that consistency and to get it to, you know, to be close to, say, the original that you have in the room with you. Would you say it's like 90% measurement and 95% measurement, or is it maybe, say, 80% measurement, 20% ears? Like, how does that actually work when you're actually designing a clone?
It depends a lot on the particular aspect that we're designing for in that moment. But just to take an example, the transistors, which are the heart of the sound. People will say it's the transformers. I disagree. It's really the transistors, which are the active components. These silver ones here, they're what do the amplification, you know. And swapping out the transistors is a much bigger sound difference than changing out the transformers for a different brand. So that was probably the most important decision we made, is which currently available transistor do we use to sound as close as possible to the old one. And that's something where measuring kind of helps you get in the ballpark, where you see, okay, like how does it deal with transients and phase and harmonic distortion compared to the original. But then once you get in the kind of ballpark, you can only really make that decision by ear. And a lot of, you know, sometimes a quantitative measurement that looks further away will sound closer, you know, because our ears aren't measuring devices. It's kind of, but I would, on the other hand, never trust myself to hear something that I can't measure. I need to back it up by measuring.
Need to work coincide,
exactly.
And one thing I've always kind of found quite interesting is how many clones there are these days. So like, the fact that I sometimes I sit there and think, how could we have another 1176 clone, another 2A clone? There's now 2, 3 like CL1B clones, and goes on and on and on. Again, you had the gate stay level, then Retro made it, and now you've got Audioscape making a copy of the Retro one. It's a copy of a copy of a copy. Why do you think that is, that the cloning side of it is so popular and people aren't? Is it because in reality you can only kind of push effect compressors so much, an opto compressor, a solid state, a VCA, a Verimute? Is there only kind of so many ways that you can push to get certain sims out of these compressors to a point where it's kind of all been done, and that's the reason why people are kind of doing a lot of clones? Or do you think it's just because it's, I don't want to say money grab, because at the end of the day, it's very important that you can get a very close representation of something that may cost $2,500 when you can get it for, maybe half the price, just because somebody's done their due diligence and done it right. But why is it that we see, why do you think we see more clones these days rather than kind of new Verimutes, new optos? Is it kind of all been done, do you think?
No, I don't think it's all been done at all. I think it's more about what the market will support. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, why are there still so many Telecasters and Stratocasters out there? I mean, it's a much more risky proposition to put out a new analog compressor in 2025. And we did it a few years ago. We made a 500 series optical compressor, which took some elements of the LA4, which was like this little sibling to the LA2A, LA3A. But then it was its own thing. And it did pretty well. I'm happy with how it did, but we would have sold a lot more if we had done something similar and said, this is an LA2A clone.
Yeah.
You know, because it's kind of like market dynamics. It's like people only have so much to spend on this stuff. And if you're going to buy one or two pieces of gear a year, are you going to spend $1,000 on some brilliant new thing that's untested and unproven and doesn't show people on your website, oh, he's got this thing, or are you going to get the LA2A clone? So I think a lot of it is a pretty, honestly, banal, you know.
And it's a shame because I think that what you're doing is great, where, again, you're very similar to, say, like Bart Herc. I've got some of the Bart Herc stuff in here, and I like how guys like yourself and Bart can take an inspiration. So, for example, you take his diode bridge compressor. It's not a 33609 or a 2254, I can't remember the exact model number, but it's, his own take. He knows diode bridge compression, and it's not that, and it's okay that it's not that, but it gives you, it's a good price. And again, it's a shame that you're not doing the optical compressor, but I did see, I think it was an Instagram post where you were talking, was it the opto cell that's hard to get, or there was a component in there that
that's exactly right. Yeah.
And it's a shame because I think there needs to be more, people that can take a lot of this stuff and bring it down to an affordable level without losing quality. Because I think what's very important about what I would say like you and some other people are doing is that in the modern day era, we shouldn't really be needing to live with the limitations of, i.e., the consistency side of it. So, if you get an 1176 and they're 5 years apart, trying to get a stereo matched pair can be impossible in the vintage world. But I think what's very important, what you talked about is, for example, a lot of the stuff that you do is because you're using modern components, you've got that level of consistency where it's much easier to get a matched stereo pair than it would be to try and get a matched stereo pair of two random, like 1176s or 2As. You've got different frequency responses, even the way that you can set them the exact same way. And again, you're going to have a completely different form of attack and release, and even just the gain. EQ's the same thing. So I think that's really, really important that you're doing that. And I think that's something that is kind of more of a benefit in the modern day, having that consistency kind of piece to piece, where I know many people see it as the character. It's like, I like that this Fairchild is different from that Fairchild, but at the end of the day, we just want consistency. We want the sound to be the sound. Well, maybe I do. Maybe I'm a bit of a modern day engineer, but do you think that's something that's changing now? Do you think we're getting into a more consistent world that there is less tolerances now, and that's a good thing? What's your kind of viewpoint on having less tolerances?
I mean, that's an interesting one. I think in general, it's better. I mean, it's amazing what we can do more cheaply now and much more consistently. But there is some of you have to work harder to capture that kind of sound. Analog gear often sounds its coolest when it's rather few components that are pushed to their edges. And I think that's part of the magic of the Neve preamp sound, is even though this is a lot of parts in general, the amplifiers themselves are only 3 transistors each, which, to put in perspective, a more modern mic preamp will have just a single chip that does everything. And that chip probably going to have 20 to 50 to 100 transistors in it. And each one is just doing a tiny little bit to perform the function of amplifying the signal. So when you have just 3 that need to do 40 dB of gain or something and then pass it to the next stage, they're all working hard. And those 3 transistors were so chaotic, and if they got pushed a little bit out of their happy place, they just did weird things. So I think that's where a lot of the grit or the woof or the wool that those preamps are famous for came from. And then it would be much harder now to take components the way that Neve did or API did in those days. They were really just trying to make something linear.
Yeah,
they weren't trying to make something colorful. They were just trying to make something as linear as possible. But with what they had, they couldn't. And it came out sounding it. I don't know if it's by accident or by ear. I wasn't in the room, or whether it's just sounds good to us because that's what everything was recorded on for so long. But I tend to think that what those vintage things do is they round out details, and they respond musically to the kind of program material in a way similar to our ears. So anyway, these kind of happy accidents that are from the limitations of technology aren't as easy to stumble into anymore because the technology is so good. But yes, we have much more repeatability and predictability, and it's not perfect. At the end of the day, it's still analog. I get a lot of emails from customers who are like, hey, when I turn the gain switch, it pops a little bit. It's like, yeah, it does. And they're like, well, how do I make that go away? I was like, well, you could use a plugin, or people who are like, where's the automatic makeup gain on this thing? Stuff like that, where it's like as good as it is now, the expectations coming, if you've only worked with digital, are that it's perfect.
And what do you think that people can learn from using like your DIY kit and actually taking time to understand what goes into making these units? So what kind of educational benefit do you think that has for, somebody that's been solely in the box, fully plugins, doesn't really understand analog? What do you think are the benefits from an educational point of view, doing it the DIY way?
Yeah. So I think there's an initial kind of familiarity with just having your hands inside of a piece of equipment, and you put everything in, you solder it, you turn it on, and oh my God, it actually works and no smoke comes out. That can be a very transformative experience because you're like, oh, okay, this stuff is not, rocket science. It's not going to kill me if I get my hands in it. So the next time something of yours goes down, you feel a little bit less kind of like helpless and despair, and you think, oh, maybe I can open this up and see, oh yeah, look, that capacitor is bulging. Maybe I can just figure out what that is and replace that capacitor, which is like 99% of stuff is pretty simple like that. So you can learn to do a bit of repair and be a little bit less intimidated. But I think in practicality, what it really does is it ignites curiosity. I mean, I guess those are related because I think feeling stupid or being made to feel stupid is the curiosity killer, right? And so if you feel like, ugh, I don't know, I don't even know what any of these parts are. But if you've gone through one of our builds, now you know how to recognize a resistor, a capacitor, a transistor. You can open this up and go, oh, okay, I recognize these parts. This isn't all Greek to me. And then you can be curious about, okay, I wonder what this does. I wonder what that does. Oh, I'll Google this and see, oh, maybe I'll watch some YouTube videos. So it can start you on a path of curiosity, I think, and openness to learning about gear and audio electronics and stuff, and just not feel kind of shut down and closed off to it.
No, I agree, because I think one thing that I noticed that many people do in the plugin world, and that's why I remember I made videos early on about it, was people were trying to see analog emulations like digital plugins because they don't have the understanding of gain staging. They don't understand if you model the analog correctly, if you try and go into a piece of analog equipment at -6 dBFS, you're going to get more harmonic distortion depending on where the zero VU is in the gear. So yeah, I think it's a very good experience for people to get into and just experience analog. I know it could be expensive, but I think the good thing with what Peterson's doing is that he's allowing you to have DIY kits, and you don't even need to do the DIY kits. They actually sell them fully built for you as well. But the fact that you can get a DIY kit and you could learn about it, you can get a 500 series cheap. I've got a Midas L6. You can get a cheap lunchbox, get it in, and then over time you'll realize actually, I actually don't really understand what my analog emulation plugins are doing, because all of a sudden you start to understand, okay, there's a line amp in there. What does the line amp do? And then all of a sudden you get to a point where, I understand how to use plugins. And it's crazy when people would think it would be going back the way to go forward. But we sometimes do have to do that. We need to sometimes figure out how things are designed, how they came, and exactly what they're doing to have a better understanding of how to use them. So we've got, now the 1073 is coming to me. I can confirm that. And I'm very excited to use it because I have two chains. I've got a vocal chain and I've got another chain that I run into a channel strip. I am a 1073 fanboy. I didn't ever think I would be. And the annoying thing with 1073s is that I can never ever really put my finger on why I prefer the 1073. Even when I do my level like ABs, I can hear something that I like better. I always find that it's better at sibilance for some reason. I don't know if that... I've done ABs and I always feel like sibilance doesn't get caught as much. Maybe it's that rimmed in off, say, some transients and stuff. And I love the fact how, again, you can just dial back the output knob and then dial in the input, and you can get a really nice kind of harmonic distortion. So in terms of the future for the company, have you got any new products that you're thinking about expanding into? Have you got any kind of big plans for the future?
I mean, so yeah, we have had to retire the opto compressor, as you said, sadly. So I would really like to fill that gap. We don't currently have a compressor. But very soon we've got some new color modules coming out. So the color format, I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at that on our website.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Is a format we have. So, well, based on a lot of what we've been talking about, which is that the stuff that makes these analog units sound so good is not that expensive. And especially if you take away the chassis and the knobs and the power supply and stuff. So in 1176, for example, I mean, the stuff really doing 90% of the sound is like $5. It's like a $1 FET and then some amplifier circuitry surrounding it. So the color format was what I created to try to just use those parts. So they're small modules called colors that you can plug in. You know what? Let me just grab one. I've got a color palette here. This is a 500 series module. And as you can see, it's got 3 sockets here. And here's a couple colors. Here's I grabbed the 1176 one. Perfect. This is the Implode, which is like an 1176, which you can configure for different, like all buttons in mode or 4-to-1 mode. This one's called the Distorta Studio. This is like a Tascam Porta Studio. I don't know if you ever had that experience of like cranking the gain on it and being like, whoa. So these plug in here to this, and then you can adjust how much you want of each of the 3 colors. So the idea was...
That's so clever.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the idea was like, if it's only, I think the 1176 is a pretty extreme case, but if it's only like $10 to $50 for the parts that make these sounds, like, let's put those on modules and sell them for that much, and then you can plug them into these palettes. So we always have new color modules coming out. We have a VCA compressor one coming out in a month or 2, but we'll always be working on more of those. And then I would like to just keep making clones of cool stuff for the 500 series format, because I think there's so much out there that even though, like you said, there's a billion clones of the API stuff and the Neve stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there that I think is really cool, but has never had the market to support a kind of clone that could be sold at Vintage King or Sweetwater. But our market, because it's the uber nerds, I think can actually support that stuff. So I think it'd be really cool to look at kind of more... Well, like the LA4 is a good example, stuff that had a really interesting vibe, but that just hasn't been appealing to bigger brands to make.
Yeah, and I think that, it is something that if you are interested in getting into it, is something that if you are an audio geek, you do need to be a bit of an audio geek to get into it. Right. But it is something that I do think is really important if you're thinking about getting into analog, instead of, just going spunking a lot of like £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 on one piece of gear. Go to DIY recording and just start off with the 1073 or start off again with the color box and just get used to working with analog instead of diving right in and expecting it's going to do wonders. Take the time to learn it. Take the time to start off on a budget. And I mean, it'd be amazing to think that for £1,000, £2,000 how much of like your own stuff that you'd be able to build. You'd be able to have an array of different options to you. And I think that's something that we sometimes forget, is that the DIY market isn't as, this place where it's all just cheap tat. It really isn't. As Peterson's been saying, we take the 1176. The fact that the main sim that everybody loves, the pushing into the line amp of the 1176, it's the FET a lot of the time. And again, it's something. Again, it could be, as he said, the transistor. Everybody thinks it's the Carnhills or the Mariners. When again, Peterson's telling you, look, I've designed it. The transistors, they're actually more important. And it's there's sometimes this thing where if you allow the hype and you allow the internet to tell you all of this stuff, you'll just believe anything. And before you know it, you'll end up buying stuff that you don't need because you don't understand what it's actually doing. For anybody looking to get into this stuff, is there anything you would advise, just to finish up on? What would you say would be the option for the first DIY project? What would be your advice for the first DIY project?
Yeah, so I think that generally with your first DIY project, most people are understandably thinking in terms of kind of the value of like, well, is it going to be better for me to build it or buy it? I think after you get into it and you've experienced that feeling of like, oh my God, I built it and it works, you start to think of building it as a perk. And so you're like, oh, obviously it's a better deal for me to build it. But for that first one, let's give us a chance to for you to see the numbers work. So you're going to probably drop, well, I'm going to say this in dollars. You can do the conversion in your head, but, $50 to $70 on soldering iron, wire cutters. I would go with something basic that everyone needs around the studio. Like we sell an FE2 DI box. We have this L2A reamp box. We have an MB2, which is a dual mic booster kind of thing for ribbon mics or low gain mics. You build one of those and compare what you paid for the kit to the assembled price. You will have paid for the soldering iron and everything with that first kit. So that's what I would do, is I would find something like that, like our beginner kits do, that are, every step of the way is documented for you. We have pages on our site that tell you like, here's what to buy, here's where to buy it in terms of the tools and stuff. Once you build one of those, statistically 50% odds you'll be totally hooked, and then from there you can do whatever you want.
Brilliant. Right, so there will be a link in the description for all of you. And if you have any questions, again, leave comments down below. And again, if you've had any experience using the DIY stuff, then again, put your comments down below. So, Peterson, thank you very much for your time. I hope you all great success for the business moving forward. And that's it. So my name is Paul Third. I'm trying to think, will Ed be back? Yes, Ed will be back. I know you've not really missed him, but I'll let him know if any of you have missed him. But yeah, me and Ed should be back next week. I'm Paul, that's Peterson. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you again next week.